Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Ozcast.
Welcome back for another special feature on Greats with Garby, and I am pumped for this one. He is someone you are all very familiar with from his time at the top of Australian sport and in recent times your TV screens as well. But I'm not sure too many people actually know his story in detail, what took him to the top and his tales from his time there. Well, here we'll deliver them all for you with thanks to ISC Sports, the choice for high performance kit, and also a new sponsor on board, Buy East Buyers Agency. If you're looking to buy a property, well, these are the guys to contact for deals in the hottest market in Australia, that is Sydney's eastern suburbs. They will project manage the whole process for you and secure an off-market and on-market property at a discounted rate. Give Dave and Ronan a call and get a special discount. For all my listeners, just say Garby sent me and they'll give you a nice discount off their fee. That is the Buy East Buyers Agency. It's great to have them on board for this man, the second fastest man in Australian history and one of our biggest sporting stars in the late 90s, and a fantastic bloke to go with it. He is Matt Shirvington, and he's with me now. Hello, Shirvo.
Thank you, Garby. How are you, mate? Yeah, great to be with you. Look, I'm on the North Shore at the moment, but if I do head east, I'll buy east. That's for sure. Make sure I do support the sponsors. Mate, thanks for having me on. Now, I just before we start, remind me, when did we first meet? Do you remember?
We would have first met in the Fox Sports studios probably 4 years ago when I returned from London and you were waltzing around doing your thing on the NRL coverage and Fox Sports News and whatnot. I would imagine it would have been around then. Before
then, and it was outside of the studio. It was in London, and it was a little broke down track called Crystal Palace.
Yes.
And it was a pre-meeting before the London Olympic Games where Sally Pearson was running. I think she hurt herself or may have pulled out or didn't run that well. I can't remember the exact story, but
yep.
We were both in the mix zone together, and I was sort of learning the trade, and you were very forthright in introducing yourself and saying g'day.
Oh, well, I do remember that now. I probably don't remember meeting you because I was completely frazzled by the world of athletics, which I was and still am a bit of a novice on. But I do remember Sally's race. It was in the lead up to the London 2012 Games. It obviously ended so well for her. But yeah, she didn't go well that day and she pretty much spat the dummy in the mix zone. And I think I do remember now gravitating to you every 5 minutes, asking you for information because I was trying to get my bearings. So thanks for the reminder on that, Shervo. We're going to get into your career, which I can't wait for, but also athletics in general, which is obviously in an interesting place at the moment. But what's life like for Matt Shirvington in general these days? We know you're on Fox Sports. What else do you get up to keep yourself busy?
I do lots of different things. I try and keep active physically myself, although family life doesn't allow for it. I've got 3 kids and a very busy wife who runs a restaurant, which through the COVID period, as you would imagine, wasn't as busy as we had all hoped. But running around after them keeps me very busy. I have a few other roles in regards to sort of sports administration. So I sit on the board of New South Wales Institute of Sport, part of a high performance advisory group for Athletics Australia, which I love contributing to. And then I also do some face-to-face coaching as well. So I've been involved with speed and agility training since I retired, working with professional footy teams, including the Waratahs, St George Illawarra Dragons, the Sydney Swans for 5 years through a pretty successful period, including that 2012 premiership. And then also currently, and not to write home about it at the moment, but the Canterbury Bankstown Bulldogs, who are fast but just not quite winning games at the moment.
How much joy do you get out of that stuff? And the results, do you actually see them in a tangible sense with players that you work with in regards to sprint coaching?
I love it. I mean, it's a really great way to spend my downtime. I really do look forward to the summer season because that's sort of pre-season for the winter sports, and that's when they get a lot of that work done, a lot of that speed endurance, speed agility work done. So, yes, absolutely love it. Doesn't allow for it too much during the season, especially with the broadcasting side of things. But tangible results, absolutely. I mean, we get the best results, surprisingly, from some of the bigger players, especially within sort of rugby league. And you consider the game's changing a little bit with some of the rule changes most recently, but some of the bigger guys are not naturally fast. So they almost have the biggest room for improvement. And the way we measure it for them is not so much top speed, but momentum. So getting their body weight and their power and getting it moving as fast as possible. And we have great results from them. I love being able to watch the game and learn from the game in terms of a physical movement aspect and applying that to my training sessions and the creativity along with that and specific positional plays and game play and requirements that they have in regards to speed and agility. So, yeah, absolutely. I see it on a daily basis, the improvement. The biggest challenge is keeping them injury free, which with speed work is often high risk. But thankfully, I've only had a couple of hammies and a couple of other sort of minor issues, but nothing major.
Fantastic. And I know your passion is still athletics, and I'm sure it always will be. I mean, there's a youngster in Australian athletics coming through now, Rowan Browning, who I think is the third quickest ever over 100 metres in Australian history. You are second quickest, and I've seen him a couple of times at Fox Sports. Lovely kid, and you seem to have a pretty good connection with him, almost mentor-like. Is that the case? And what does his career mean to you now?
Yeah, I guess you could say that. I met Rowan at a young age. He burst onto the scene actually paralleled with another young sprinter who's doing extremely well called Jack Hale, who actually broke my Australian junior record, and he's gone on to improve his best time quite significantly. But as a 16-year-old, he ran a wind-assisted 10:13, which really got some big media attention, not just here in Australia, but worldwide. As a 16-year-old running those sorts of times, even if it is wind assisted, is quite significant. So he got thrust into the limelight. There was a young man behind him, same age, who ran 10:18, which had that been a standalone time and won the race, he would have had a similar attention given to him. But that young man was Rowan Browning. So he's always had to sit in the shadow a little bit of Jack Hale, and not most recently, but definitely sat in the shadow for a little while there in his junior period. And then he came through and I remember going to a national championships and he finished third. So he got his first podium position, not first, but third. And that was a big improvement as well, but still, again, had work to do. And then he went to the 2018 Commonwealth Games and missed the final by 1/100th of a second. And it was almost a story of close but not quite for Rowan. And then the following year, 2019, he ran, as you said, the fastest time. I think it was the fastest time for about 12 years since Patrick Johnson and myself were running, and third fastest time all time on the list. And I guess it was the breakthrough that sort of instigated some more mentoring from my point of view, because I'd always sort of been in touch with him, and his coach was actually a teammate of mine, Andrew Murphy, who was a regular top five in the world over triple jump. And so I always remained in contact with him and interested to see how Rowan was progressing. But he's a great story and a great young talent, and his head's screwed on right, and hopefully he'll continue the progression that he's had. But I think it's those failures, ironically, are the things that will really make him strong when he does get a chance to break through on the world stage.
So what sort of chance does a guy like Rowan Browning or Jack Hale have to make it to the Olympics and maybe make a semi-final, get close to a final? Because I'm sure there's a lot of cynics out there listening right now going, that's all well and good, but we're not going to get close, are we? We haven't got anyone to get behind like we did with you and Patrick Johnson. Is that the case, or do they have a chance?
Yeah, look, we're post Usain Bolt era now, and Without a doubt, the level of competition without Usain has dropped a little bit. And I think he's partly to blame for that because he was near unbeatable, as we know. And it wasn't really except for Justin Gatlin who pushed him for, a consistent amount of time. And Justin was, he got caught taking drugs and served a significant drug ban and came back and was an old age sprinter, but performed well. But we're post Usain Bolt now. Christian Coleman, who had a bit of a run-in with the drug testers only last week, missed a third drug test, and we're waiting to see what happens with him. He's an American sprinter, is the fastest in the world at the moment, the current world champion. But they're not running consistently 9.6s and 9.7s, which Usain did, and particularly at the major championship. So that's heartening to a certain degree. However, that progression, and don't forget, when I started athletics at an international level, the world record was held by Maurice Green, who had just dipped under 9.8, 9.79 was the world record at the time. So it's not improving into the future. It's going to stagnate for a little bit, which will give our Australian athletes a chance to catch up. Are they there yet for a semi-final berth? Probably not. I think you're going to have to run consistently 10 flat or 9.9 at a major championship to make it through. And if you can do that, then you give yourself every chance. I mean, the semi-finals are a lot more competitive typically than the final itself. Yeah. And you'll see across the board the times aren't necessarily faster except for maybe the podium finishes. So that typically happens. So you've got to run your best race for the semi-final. And I know firsthand, especially the Sydney Olympic Games, that I missed out by one spot making that final and knew that I probably hadn't run fast enough or focused well enough on it being my last race. I was thinking ahead to the final. So in answer to your question, yes, I think we have a talent pool strong enough at the moment to be competitive. There's a bit of improving to go to really make an impact on bagging a medal. But as stricter rules around drug taking are enforced, and that's an ongoing battle with blood testing and random drug testing throughout all federations, it's only going to tighten up and narrow the pool of talent and the guys running super, super fast. So that also gives our clean athletes here in Australia a chance. So I'm not disheartened by it at all, and I think we've got a really strong group coming through in regards to sprinting.
Yeah, I watched that Sydney Olympic semi-final this morning and your amazing run at the Com Games in 98, which we'll get into in some detail. But talking about how difficult it might be for our two best sprinters to make the semi-final, how worried are you then, Shirvo, about athletics in Australia on the whole and actually keeping the best athletes when you might have a 15, 16-year-old who runs like the wind, but he's got the AFL, the NRL, basketball, soccer saying, hey, you can earn this much money when you turn 17, 18 just by slotting into a team of 11 or 22. How difficult is it to retain those athletes, and therefore how worried are you about the future of athletics in Australia?
All you need to do is have a look through the Little Athletics national records, even currently, and you'll see a host of other sporting professionals that still hold national records in Little Athletics. You're talking about Josh Hazlewood, of course, a cricketer, held a javelin record. Payne Haas still holds a shot put record, a rugby league player, of course, a national representative. Sam Kerr, who, a little bit closer to home, was very proficient at Little Athletics and obviously chose to go down the football route and has become, arguably the best female footballer in the world. So it's very difficult, but it's always been there. It's always been a determinant for athletic talent, I guess, athletics, and really does highlight identification of good athletes for all sport. And that's its real value, athletics in Australia, particularly as a starting point. It's kind of being overlooked at the moment, and you talk about the challenges. There are many challenges for not just athletics but Olympic sport, And let's use COVID as the example. And it's so good to see some additional funding secured for Olympic sport going into Tokyo next year, which obviously was meant to be next month. The government's come on board and secured some funding there, another $25 million, which is great. However, for the first time ever, you've got some of the big professional players like NRL and AFL struggling financially and putting their hand out for government funding, which never really happened. So Olympic sport and athletics particularly is sort of down the pecking order in regards to funding. And funding is the basis for high performance programming. So you need it to run it. You need to run it to get the performances. Do I worry about losing talent? I don't, because I think in Australia we have such a deep, rich pool of great athletes, and we can cover all bases. And we've got, yes, a lot of sports to cover, but I think there's enough to go around. I think the appeal of athletics is diminishing slightly, and I say that in the nicest possible way, but let me use an example. When I first competed at the national championships as a teenager, Kathy Freeman was running the 400 metres, and obviously this was, 3 years out from the Sydney Olympic Games, and a lot of attention on Kathy, particularly at that time. The Channel 9 news went live to our national championships to see Kathy's race, and then cut back live to see the 100-metre race the following day, which I was a part of. That, I guess, was an indication of how significant athletics was on the agenda for Australian sport at that time. Would we see that now? Have we seen the national championships even on broadcast television? The answer is no, not in the last 5 years. So you can't bank on every 4 years an Olympic Games rolling around. You can't bank on every 2 years a World Championships being broadcast to, I guess, narrate the storylines. And that's what it all comes down to, is the background and the storylines of the people and the investment of the audience.
Yeah, if we get an athlete that can realistically win a gold, that all changes it. It only takes one person, male or female, to change that, especially in a glamour event like the 100. So what would you say to a young athlete who comes to you? Let's say it's maybe not Rowan, he's further down the line, but someone who's 15, 16 and he says, listen, I'm pretty good at this, but I'm being offered a contract here by the AFL or the NRL. You've been to an Olympics. You've been a glamour star of Australian athletics. Why should I stick with it when the easy option seems to be joining one of the team sports? What would your message be to them?
Well, here's a question for you. Why do you need to do one? And I know that sounds very strange in this world, because you could get a significant wedge of money from a football club that want to protect you. But why? I mean, why can't you be robust enough to, in the summertime, compete in a track and field program? I mean, what's it going to do for you? It's only going to increase your speed potentially. If you're a power athlete, it's only going to increase your power potentially, a shot putter or a discus thrower. It's going to increase your endurance if you decide to do some middle distance. I mean, there are probably more top-level 800-metre runners in AFL at the moment, and no disrespect to our crop of 800-metre runners, because we have significant ones in athletics at the moment. But there are a number of middle-distance runners that chose the AFL pathway because they needed the lung capacity to be able to compete on the AFL field for 120 minutes. That could probably, in the summertime, be competitive at a national championship. Might not win it, but they could be competitive. Same with sprinting. I mean, imagine Josh Adokar during a December-January athletics campaign. How interesting it would be to see how well he would go. Why couldn't he do that? I mean, I think, and it's not just athletics. I mean, there are so many other examples of it. My old coach, a Russian guy called Michael Kamel, relocated to the UK and was head of sprints and relays for the UK team for a period of time. He actually is an amazing story. He went to the qualified for the 1984 LA Olympic Games as a sprinter in the relay team. Russia or USSR at the time boycott that Olympic Championships. And then he decided he wanted to go to the Games, still had the ambition to go to the Games, became a bobsledder and went to the 88 Calgary Olympic Games to represent USSR in bobsled. So he had that background. He's now one of the head coaches in the UK's bobsled program. But he had an athlete a couple of years ago in his bobsled program that in the summertime was the only British athlete to run under 10 seconds in the 100 metres. I mean, it can happen.
Yeah.
There are obvious connections and talents or skill sets that you can take from one to the other. And this COVID period potentially has offered up a real recalibration of what you can offer, not just one sport, but maybe a couple. And what does that mean for that professional sport? Does it attract a new audience? Does it give some growth? So I've been thinking about that quite seriously, and even myself, who has taken a skill set and understanding of my sport and applied it to a number of other sports, and not just football codes, but I've worked with winter athletes, Alex Pullen, the world champion snowboarder. I've worked with swimmers and the power off the blocks to try and improve their reaction time, etc. I've worked with BMXers, trying to work on their starts and reaction over the jumps, etc. So there are definitely elements of cross code and cross pollination that we can definitely work on and encourage. Yeah. And I know injury is a risk, but running in a straight line is not that risky if it's done properly.
It's a great theory, and I think it would do a lot for the other athletes who experience something different as well as of course athletics, who would benefit so much from that cross-code combination. That's a great theory, and was great to hear it from you. Let's get into your career now, because it's such an interesting one. And as I said before, I think it's one, in terms of actual stories, is probably undertold in Australian sport. So where did it all begin, Shirvo? Not just athletics, but the love of athletics and the passion for it. Where did it all start for you, and how was it born?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Well, I didn't love it. I loved playing all sport. As a 14, 15-year-old, I remember starting little athletics late, and I would go down to the athletics track and do a couple of events, and then I would head off to other sports. So actually, in the summertime, I loved playing baseball. That was my real love in the summer, and then I'd obviously play winter sport as well. But so that's what I'd do at a young age. When I reached the age of 16, I went to my first all-schools championships running in the under-17s state championships, and won the 100 and 200 metres. And I remember Mum saying to me, and I didn't train at all at that time, and don't get me wrong, I wasn't one of those unbeatable athletes coming through as a junior. I used to go down to Little Athletics and get beaten in the 100 on a Saturday morning.
Wow.
Or at an inter-schools competition. I wouldn't always win the 100 or wouldn't always win every event that I went in, which you see some kids do that quite often, and they get this protege sort of tag. That wasn't me. I did well, and I had a lot of natural talent, but it wasn't going to sort of present itself to me. So let me put it into perspective. When I started with my coach as a almost 17-year-old, it was late in my 16th year, I ran 11:24. And I know I ran 11:24 because my dad, who was a rugby player, his best time over 100 was 11:27. And he said, "You've got to beat my personal best," which I did. And then Mum said, "Let's get a coach for you." And we found Michael, who was a young Russian guy who had moved out here. An amazing story himself, who I just touched on. But he moved out to work with Kostya Zoo as his conditioner. So there was that connection with Kostya early on in his career before he was actually a world champion at that time when he came to Australia, but before he became Australian. And so I worked with Michael, who was 27 at the time. I was 17. He was young. I was young. I couldn't understand him. He would often swear at us in Russian, or try and explain things in Russian. Didn't really go well. But then we evolved together, I think, Michael and I. And the thing we focused on the most was trying to improve our starting acceleration. Really, that was a big part of it. And then getting stronger generally. So I went from 11:24 with Michael. Within 12 months, I qualified for the World Junior Championships around 10:65, which kind of was a culmination of some of that training, but hadn't quite broken through yet. 1065 made me the 6th fastest member of the World Junior team as a 17-year-old there. And I didn't run. I sat in the stands at those World Juniors and I watched 4 Australian sprinters go around and win a bronze medal at the World Juniors. And I hated it. I hated it. And I remember walking away from those games thinking, this isn't going to happen again. This is the turning point for me. No more grey areas. I've got to be the best. I've got to be the first picked. And I don't want to miss out on having that opportunity to do a victory lap or a glory lap that they did, winning that bronze medal. So within 12 months of that, I'd broken the Australian junior record as an 18-year-old, 10:29. So my time within 18 months had come down by about a second, which in 100 metres is a significant amount. Yeah. And that was into a world championship year that year. And I was still a junior. So I went to the Australian Championships as an under-20 athlete, won the 100 and 200 metres at the national championships. And there was a world championships in Athens. And I was thinking, right, I want to get on that team. Anyway, I didn't get picked because I ran in the juniors instead of the seniors. And my time on that day running in the juniors was actually faster than the seniors race. And I could have had a pretty good shot at winning it as an 18-year-old. Anyway, I missed out again. And I said to my coach, Michael, I just said, I'm not going to keep doing this if I do my best and just miss out. And he said, well, let's make you better. The end of that year, I went over and trained with a guy called Tom Tellez, who was Carl Lewis's coach, based in Houston at the University of Houston, the Cougars they were, and trained with him for a month. And I literally would have done more than 1,000 block starts, so much so that I had calluses on my fingers and knees. And, I mean, in Houston, the burning hot track, and you have to go down every time. And I remember him saying just another one, down and back was his mantra, pushing down and pushing back. That was all we did. I did do a couple of training sessions with Carl Lewis as well, who was retired at that time, had done a little bit of a world tour to say goodbye. And I remember running 300 metre session with Carl, and that was interesting. But when I came back, so that camp, when I came back, I competed in my first national competition, and I probably won it by 10 metres. Wow. And I would have put 5 metres in front of them in the first 20 to 30 metres. My start was just unbelievable. And it was that repetition, that constant improvement and that little tweaking that it just became untouchable. So that kind of became my tag, was that I was kind of the fastest out of the blocks. And I didn't get beaten that domestic season, and qualified for, where are we up to now, 1998. I qualified for the Commonwealth Games in 1998. So I just turned 19 years old.
I did not realise you were such a late starter, and the acceleration, pardon the pun, was just so rapid from the age of 15 to 18. Incredible. And Shirvo the starter, no one could touch you out of the blocks, and away you go. But before we get on to 98 and the Commonwealth Games, which, catapults you into national stardom, that training that you talk about, doing that, I know you were at that stage in the mode of improvement, but when you're in that hard work, athletics training zone, when you get to the top level, you're preparing yourself for an event, 10 seconds every 4 years. How damn difficult is that mentally, to train like that with no one else around you, doing, let's be honest, pretty monotonous things for a 10-second race every 4 years?
Yeah, you don't quantify it like that. I mean, you're right. I mean, it's the fastest sport from start to finish there is, except for maybe a baseballer or something like that who goes out to bat once every 3 or 4 hours.
They play all the time.
Play all the time, and they get a couple of shots at it. But you're right. I mean, the thing that motivated me the most was the outcome, and in some ways that was my biggest downfall as well, because it really occupied so much of my thought process, was what the result is. And I think early on, having that damage of failure and learning from that, and then applying that, and that fear of it happening again, that missed opportunity, just drove me so hard. One thing I did know, and I think anyone that ever competed against me or trained with me, or even our training group alone, we trained harder than anyone in the world. And as I said, I've trained with some of the best coaches, the best trainers, the best athletes in the world, and hands down, we trained our butts off. And I think that was one of my best attributes, was the fact that I was able to absorb a lot of work and stay reasonably injury-free for a long period of time. The thing that broke down the most for me was my skeletal system, my bones. So I had more stress fractures than I had soft tissue injuries, and that was probably the biggest problem. But it is a hard thing thinking about the 10 seconds, but you also know if you don't do every little bit of it, that 1%. And I know the 1% is a really interesting analogy for a lot of sports, but 1%. So I break this down for kids, for corporates, whoever. If I improved 1% in my top 3 races, and including the semi-final at the Sydney Olympic Games, not only would I make it through to that semi-final, I would have finished on the podium with a 1% improvement on that race.
Wow.
And that's what you put it down to. So you think, if I miss 1% of this session, is that 1% going to accumulate to be the failure 1% that won't get me across the line that little bit faster?
Extraordinary thing to try and compute. Thankfully, in 98, it did go, at the time, I guess, in terms of expectations, as well as it could have possibly gone for you. I mean, you finished 4th at the Commonwealth Games behind, if you don't mind, Atto Bolden, Frankie Frederiksen, Ottobelly Thompson, all medalists in the 100 metres at an Olympic Games. So it is completely and utterly elite, even without the Americans and a few other nations there. Why did it all go so well for you in that race? What clicked for you to produce the second fastest Australian run ever? And as I said before, catapult you into being a national hero?
It really did come together for me there. And I was still learning. I mean, I was 19 years of age. I think the biggest difference then was, so what a lot of people don't realise is when I left Australia, my personal best time was 10:20. I hadn't gone any faster than that. So as I said, the improvement was really rapid, and then it slowed right down. And I was thinking 10:20, that's not bad. I mean, it's a decent time, and I had qualified to run the individual race at the Commonwealth Games, but it would be competitive, but probably not medal worthy. I actually went to a World Cup event in Johannesburg literally 3 days before the Commonwealth Games started in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. So I went over there, and Joburg, for those of you that don't know, is 1,200 metres altitude, which is deemed as advantageous for sprinters because the air's a bit thinner and you move a bit faster through it. So it would have had an asterisk if I had have run fast there, which I did. I actually broke the Australian record there for the first time and ran 10:07. And I remember thinking, I love altitude. This is fantastic. But I'm on my way to Malaysia, to Kuala Lumpur, which is sea level, thinking I'm not going to run as fast there. There's no way. But what I didn't realise was by running that fast, my body had been introduced to a speed that it never had done before. And my muscle memory was starting to compute and log it in. And the first race I had in Kuala Lumpur, I ran from memory, I'm going to say, I don't know, maybe about 10:15, something like that. And that would have been my second fastest time anyway. And I remember thinking, geez, that was quick, not as quick as Joburg, but maybe that's what it equates to. This is where in every lesson that could ever be learned in the corporate world, in sport, in whatever, consistency is the key. So I ran 10:15, 10:12, 10:10 and 10:03 in the final. But it was that consistency of delivering those races day in, day out, plus the 10:07 in Johannesburg only a few days earlier, that really allowed me to run fast in the final. So I'd broken the Australian record again in the final and ran 10:03 at sea level, which then made me think, wow, I'm a contender. You know, I feel like I can compete on the world stage. And don't forget, this was barely 2 years out from the Sydney 2000 Games, of which, as a 15-year-old, I, at 3 a.m. in the morning, got on a ferry at Manly across to Circular Quay, arrived at Circular Quay in front of the big screen to see Juan Antonio Samaranch in 2000 and, when was it? It was 1993.
Yeah.
Say the winner is Sydney. I literally arrived and he said, and the winner is Sydney, and everyone just went boom. I was 15 years of age. Yeah. There was no way I would have thought to myself, I'm going to be there.
Yeah.
So for me to run 10:03 2 years out was a realization that, oh man, I could do something, not just compete at an Olympic Games half an hour away from where I grew up, but I could actually have an impact on this.
The whole nation thought that. And more to the point, okay, you've got the pin-up boy looks, let's be honest, with the long blonde hair. You've got the boy next door charm. You've just finished fourth in the Commonwealth Games behind 3 legitimate medal chances, 2 years out from your own Olympics, as you've said. So you have literally gone boom. You're a national sporting star, and there is crazy attention for you and crazy demand on your every minute. What was that period like, Shirvo, that 2 years leading into Sydney? Because you were as big a name as any in sport in this country.
Yeah, I learned a lot of lessons through that period. And I think a culmination of the pressures and the expectation definitely got to me. To your point, I mean, Addo Bolden won in 98, that Commonwealth Games. It's still the fastest Commonwealth Games race of all time. And that was due to the fact that Addo was training with a guy called Maurice Green, who was the current world record holder at the time, and a very fast training group. So Addo actually got bronze in Sydney behind Maurice, his training partner. The hardest thing for me was I didn't want the attention and I didn't want the expectation. And if I, in hindsight, had have addressed things a little bit differently, my preparation would be very different. For those games particularly. I learned a lot along the way and needed to. But there was one simple thing going into the 2000 Games was we trained too hard. We trained too hard. I think the pressure and expectation pushed us to. We felt like we needed to do more and more and more. I was ready to run fast, and I'd run extremely fast in the there was a test event only 6 weeks before the Games and ran 10:12 into a headwind and like dominated the field, and it felt so good. And then went over to the UK, to Europe, and competed over there. Ran 10:07 at Crystal Palace, actually, that track that we first met, and Crystal Palace was a notoriously slow track, and I finished third behind Maurice Green and Dwayne Chambers, who was also done for drugs a little bit later on. Anyway, so I was in very good shape and ready to go, and I probably should have put it on ice, but instead I came back. I went to Queensland. We're training out of Nudgee College in Brisbane, and I did another block of training, and it unravelled a bit of that sharpness, and it just didn't put me in the right position. I ran 10:13, I think was my fastest time at the Games, which was still competitive and put me in a good position for the semi-final. The biggest issue I had in those Games was the fact that in the semi-final, actually I think, did Addo get bronze or silver? I can't remember. Anyway, in the semi-final, I had 2 guys on the outside of me, Maurice Green and Addo Bolden. And I hadn't raced them that year. And the pressure of knowing that they were the guys to beat in that semi-final, thinking I need to beat them in the final, forced me to try too hard. And I needed to race them 2, 3, maybe half a dozen times in the lead up to those Games to feel comfortable knowing that I could sit on their shoulder and maybe push them and maybe go past them. But I hadn't had that chance. So it was all very foreign. But they're the intricacies of what sprinting is, because you have no room for error, and a slight error maybe missed out on the final by a tenth of a second. So, tough.
Yeah, trust you're enjoying Matt Shirvington. He is absolutely fantastic. And don't worry, the chat about his package and that famous Lycra suit is coming up as well. I know a lot of you are waiting for that one. Before we get back to that, though, let's just thank our sponsors, ISC Sports, the choice for high-performance kit, and also a new sponsor that's jumped on board, Buy East Buyers Agency. Now, if you are looking to buy a property, these are the guys to contact for deals in the hottest market in Australia, that is Sydney's eastern suburbs. They will project manage the whole process for you, secure you an on-market and off-market property at a discounted rate. That is the crucial part. So give Dave and Ronan a call. You'll get a special discount for all my listeners. Just say that Garby sent me, or I heard you on Greats with Garby, and they'll give you a 10% discount, which is huge, off of their fee. That is Buy East Buyers Agency. It's great to have them on board. Let's get back to Shervo. I watched that race again this morning, as I said, and you know, you speak so eloquently, and yes, you were young then, but you just seemed as if you couldn't get words out of your mouth. You seemed so flat afterwards. And we all remember Kathy Freeman when she won, and how the reaction for everyone was, wow, look how relieved she is. Look at the emotion because of all the pressure of Sydney and being your home Olympics. Where were your emotions at, if you recall them now, having missed out on the final, but that whole Sydney process being over after so much pressure and talk and hype for a couple of years?
It makes me want to cry now. You know, like it still feels very raw. I mean, it's 20 years this year. I remember going down on my haunches so vividly and punching the track, just going, you missed your chance, mate. You know, and I think that's the biggest issue, is that you don't get that back. You don't get that opportunity back. And you talk about 10 seconds and, you know, the hours and hours and hours that you lead up to it. But, that's still really raw, that emotion. And I remember that interview at the end. It was Paddy Welsh, I think. And, it was a hard one, that one, really hard. And do you know, and it's been really interesting going into broadcasting. So my first exposure to broadcasting was the Vancouver Olympic Games, and I was in the mix zone there, and then did some Commonwealth Games, and then the Olympics in 2012. And really interesting being on the other side of the microphone in the mix zone, and it was the same thing for me. The disappointment wasn't in the performance. The disappointment was in the consolidation for the investment of all of those around me. And I didn't deliver on that investment. And that is the most heartbreaking thing. And you ask anyone that wins a gold medal and the tears rolling down their cheek, it's not for them. It is the overall appreciation and admiration for those that have put them in that position. And they'll always say it. I mean, what a justifiable way to say thank you. Yeah. By standing up there and seeing your flag raise and the anthem and the gold medal around your neck. And I think it's the same disappointment that you couldn't do that in response to those people that have helped you get there.
But you did deliver for them over the course of your career, and they all take enormous pride, no doubt, as the country did in you and still does, which is why we're talking right now. And, you know, those moments before those big races, everyone gets excited and everyone gathers round, and you are going through arguably the tensest moment, I would imagine, in sport, standing on a block when, as you said before, you have to get every single percentile 100% correct to execute what you want. And you've got these mega stars with mega egos doing all their pre-race histrionics and so on and so forth. Give us an insight, Shirvo, into what that moment is like as your name's being read out and you're preparing mentally with all the showboating going on around you before such a monumental moment.
Do you know, it's hugely nerve-wracking, but it's a lot worse spectating, being in the stands, not having control over that moment. And I know that based on watching major championships, watching, be it rugby internationals, be it whatever it is, be it Socceroos, trying to qualify for the World Cup, etc. If you can determine your own destiny, you tend to have a lot more relaxed focus. And that's why you look at footballers. Like I look at someone like James Tedesco at the moment, and everyone's talking about how does he do it, and he would probably say the same thing. He has the ability. He's built up that skill set over a long period of time since he was a kid, and he just goes out there and executes, and it's natural. It's the New South Wales Blues fans that are concerned, that are worried, that are nervous that he can't get that winning try at the end. He's not worried about that. If he gets the ball, he'll make it happen. So it was the same for me. So I'd stand behind the blocks, and yes, I'd be nervous and I'd be worried. But I also knew that if I execute this, then I know I can get a result. So it's a lot easier being the person in control.
Are you aware of what's going on around you when Maurice Green is doing his thing and these other superstar athletes and smacking their head and trying to intimidate you? Do you take notice of it?
Yeah, I mean, the current crop, like they'll say they have a bit of banter and all of that, but the current crop are actually, they like each other. There was a genuine hate. There was a genuine hate in the moment. I mean, we all got on afterwards, but there was a lot of posturing and a lot of trash talk, and I've seen moments in the call room where you're getting ready to go out onto the track that have almost blown up, where you've had people being held by the scruff of the neck, talking about various different things to sort of instigate that issue. I remember, so I moved over to the UK, and my coach was Linford Christie, who won the gold medal in 1992 in the 100 metres. And I remember one of my things as an athlete, I would always shake everyone's hand before and after the race. And it was, for me, just a nice thing to do. A kid that grew up in a nice family, nice part of Sydney. I just thought it was an appropriate thing to do. Say, good luck, hope you go well, and, well done at the end. Anyway, Linford told me when I started with him that when I used to do it with him, because he slapped my hand away, I remember, before a race. And he said, I hated when you would do that. And I said, why? And he said, because I felt like you were taking my power, my energy away by shaking my hand. So I'd just slap it away. Don't be nice to me. Don't take my power. Don't take my energy. You do your thing, I'll do mine. So that was definitely a part of racing back then. The best sledge or the best mind manipulation that I've come across is from an American athlete called John Drummond, who was a bit of a character. And if you Google him, John Drummond false start, he false started at World Championships one year and refused to believe the starter that he'd false started. Yes. He lay down on the track for 15 minutes.
I remember
saying,
that.
I did not move. I did not move. And, so he was a bit of a character. Anyway, I remember I can't remember what the race was, but before you go down, the starter says, gentlemen, on your marks, you can put your hand up if you're feeling uneasy and say, sorry, sir, can we start again? Until you get to set and then it's done. But anyway, so we go down on our blocks and we're all there waiting to go, and John Drummond puts his hands up and says, excuse me, sir, I've got an issue. Anyway, we all stand up. He goes over to the official in front of us so that we could all hear and says, the cameramen on the right-hand side over there are being too noisy. I can hear the clicking of their camera, and can you please go over and tell them to stop? It's very distracting. And he said it so that we could all hear it as a performance. Anyway, so we all go back down. The starter says, on your marks. And all we're thinking about is I can't hear anything. I can't hear any clicking or, the cameraman or anything like that. Meanwhile, John Drummond switched on, set, go, and we're all still thinking, I can't hear anything. and the gun's gone, and our mind has just slightly been taken off the job at hand. And John Drummond, sure enough, see you later, wins the race. So, and when you're dealing with marginal room for error, you can definitely manipulate people in that moment and put in a seed of doubt. And sprinters are notoriously insecure people because they know that you live and die by the smallest margin, right? So you've got to believe in it. And if you don't believe in it, you could be half a metre behind and losing the race. I remember Linford telling me this story about Ben Johnson and having a conversation with Ben Johnson after he got done for drugs the second time and said, why do you do it? And he said, it's not about the physical advantages. It's the mental advantage, knowing that I'm on something that you're not on. It's like going to war and I've got a machine gun and everyone else has a knife.
Yeah,
I'm going to beat you. Without a doubt, I'm going to beat you. So, it was a real mind game at times, a real mind game.
So you become a huge, and that's a wonderful story, a huge national star because of what you're doing on the track. But there's also another element to Shirvo, and I'm sure people are thinking right now, why haven't you asked this yet? And I can see you laughing now on Zoom because you're probably sick of it, but it has to be asked. But the package and the Lycra suit, which becomes just I say this in the best possible way, a bit of a national fascination. It becomes such an angle to Shirvo that people love talking about. What did you make of all of that and the fact that, you were on display for the world and the nation to see?
Well, that was that same games, and it just, that bodysuit just didn't fit right? And I was amazed. Obviously, there was sort of two parts to it. I'd performed really well and broken the Australian record, and it was primetime TV and all of that. But then there was that element, and I was getting emails from young kids saying, my mum's single, would you marry her, and all this stuff. And it was just like, oh, my God. And then got a lot of feedback from the gay community too, which was interesting. It is what it is. It's part of my story, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending how you look at it. I've got this one mate who keeps me grounded in that department. And whenever it comes up and he's around, he always jumps on my shoulder and says, the camera puts on 10 pounds. So that always makes me laugh. But it's definitely part of my story. So yes, thanks for bringing it up, Garby.
Oh, sorry, Matt, I had to. But I do. It's definitely more fortunate than unfortunate. But yeah, just a part of the Shirvo tale that obviously people love talking about, and I think endeared you to the public as well. The way in which you dealt with it, it's a classic. But the on-field success continued after Sydney, and I found this interesting reading your story. You get a bronze medal in the 2001 World Champs in the relay. That's incredible when you think about where world athletics has gone and where Australia sits. To finish third at the World Champs and claim a bronze, I think that's a national sporting achievement that's probably lost on the public.
Well, maybe it's lost because we actually didn't finish third. We finished fourth. But the American team, including a young man called Tim Montgomery, who also got tested positive for drugs, who was the current world record holder at that time, and partner of Marion Jones, ironically. We finished fourth at those World Championships and ended up getting a bronze medal in the male about 2 years later. But we were a really fast team. And it's, a great lesson for people out there that team ended up being, so there were six of us that left Australia, and two of the members of that team actually got injured and went home. And there were four of us left. And it was really one of those moments where we all looked at each other and said, if we're not going to do this, no one can do it for us. There's no issue with selection. We all know we're selected. We just have to run our best. We just have to perform at our best and deliver on the day. And that's what we did. And it was just, it all just came together. We weren't the fastest team by no means. We just had really slick changes and it went well. And yeah, it's definitely one of the highlights. being able to say that, bronze medalist at the World Championships. We did the same at the Commonwealth Games as well. And unfortunately, an Olympic medal eluded me. But there's definitely a handful of good moments too.
Patrick Johnson, you had such a rivalry with him. It was the two of you and daylight in Australian sprinting at the time. What was that rivalry like? Was it friendly? Was there animosity at times? What was your relationship like with Patrick?
Oh, really competitive. We didn't really socialise outside of the track. Amicable, but we definitely weren't mates off the track. And we both realised that when it came down to it, all we wanted to do was beat each other. But I mean, to a certain extent, we need to acknowledge that rivalry pushed us to be the best. And ultimately, Patrick's got the Australian record and broke 10 seconds. And it was at a meeting in Japan with favourable conditions. Not that I'm too concerned about it. But I was actually at a training camp in Arizona at the time, and I got woken up at 3 a.m. and they said, "Oh, Patrick's broken your national record. He's run 9:93," and I was like, "What? That's ridiculous." Anyway, you can imagine how good a training session I had that day. That was a cracking training session. But it didn't slow me down in the sense of wanting to still achieve, and actually came out and ran fast that year and the following year. And I think that's what rivalries do. You improve each other's best and keep chipping away at it. And every time you had a chance to compete with each other, you just took that advantage of trying to get one up.
See, and you retired in 2008, which I thought was, looking back over your record, quite belated in terms of where your peak was. I mean, it's a long time after you sort of hit your peak did you retire. What were those last, 7 or so years like after you've reached your zenith in the caper? What were they like to go through before you eventually said, all right, I've had enough now?
Well, I mean, the assumption is that you're going to continue to improve, and the problem is that you can do all the same work and the outcome isn't necessarily going to be the same. So, I mean, it was I was definitely aspiring to be better even at the tail end of my career. I mean, some would say that I retired at 29 years of age. Some would say that's young, really young for a sprinter. I probably could have gone to 2012 if I had have kept pushing. But and I think that's why, coming in late and not having this, sort of outward desire to be an Olympian as a 5-year-old, I was happy to move on to something else. And television presented an opportunity for me, and I thought that's an interesting challenge. And it was kind of a tough decision retiring, but then in hindsight, actually not in hindsight, at the time there wasn't much toing and froing. Once I'd stopped, and I didn't actually retire. I didn't announce my retirement. I didn't take my name off the random drug testing list. I just thought that's it for me. Nothing. I also knew that nothing was going to top representing Australia at a home Olympic Games. It just wasn't. There was just nothing. And I think that's why that emotion I showed before about finishing that race and not having the outcome the way I wanted it to be, I guess that's what it all comes down to, is that I guess my career was very front-ended with achievement, and I was never really going to have that same satisfaction down the line. So I was happy to walk away.
And now you're an absorber of all sports and across all sports and a lover of all sports, and you probably were for most of your life. But considering that, with your knowledge of what is required in athletics to be the best, does anything match what someone like a Usain Bolt is able to do or a Michael Johnson does for you? Is that the pinnacle of sport for you, being that good for so long?
There's so many arguments for who's the GOAT, right?
Yeah.
And each year you'll see someone thrown up as the greatest of all time in any sport. But there's so few as well when you look at it. I mean, Michael Johnson yes, I saw him break the 400-metre world record live. I saw David Rudisha break the 800-metre world record live. I saw Usain Bolt break the Olympic record live. The thing with Usain, which is unbelievable, and they all have their stories of greatness. The thing with Usain that's unbelievable is that going into the Beijing Olympic Games in 2008, his personal best time for the 100 metres was 10:12. He hadn't really focused on it before that. Not 10:12, 10:12 I think it was. Or 10:08, something like that. Definitely not 9:58, which is where it ended up. But he competed in 9 events at the Olympic Games and won 9 gold medals. Like 100% strike rate over 3 Olympic Games is phenomenal. Yeah. Yes, he got stripped of a relay medal because a teammate tested positive, but I still give him that medal. I mean, he still had to run and cross the line, and he didn't test positive. But then you have someone like Michael Phelps, 20-odd Olympic medals, including 19 gold. I mean, that's unequaled. But then you have someone like Carl Lewis, who I mentioned before, who, for those that don't know, in 1984 won the 100, 200, relay 4x100 metres and the long jump at 1 Olympic Games. And you say, yeah, but that was 1984, it was a different time, whatever. He won the long jump in 84, 88, 92 and 96. 4 consecutive Olympic Games over that amount of time, winning the long jump, which was one of the most competitive events in track and field, is just phenomenal in itself. But then you have, alternate sports like Shaun White in snowboarding, GOAT. Kelly Slater in surfing, GOAT. Tony Hawk in skateboarding, GOAT. Jess Fox in canoe slalom, the best. I mean, to be someone that is unrivaled in your sport is such a phenomenal thing. And Muhammad Ali boxing. I mean, it is such an amazing thing to not just compete on the world stage, but to be so dominant, which is so rare. And I think you talk about the best, and you can definitely list them in a very short way.
There's something that is just so mind-blowing, though, about a sprinter who blows the rest of the field away. Like Usain in Beijing and then in London, I remember watching at a Jamaican party when he won the 200. It is such an exhilarating feeling watching a human do something like that in such a pure event, like just the 100 metres, like running, which everyone grows up doing. But did you ever wonder or worry about the doping side of it? Did that ever cross your mind? Because it always used to be speculated upon, of course, in a sport that's had so many issues. Did that ever worry you or make you wonder when it came to someone like Usain or others?
It definitely used to frustrate me, especially when, do you know the worst thing about it? When you'd see people that were so lovely to you, in the dining hall, in and around the sport, were great competitors, were just nice people, and they would get down on one knee after the race and they'd do the sign of the cross and they'd pray to the Lord and all of that, and then a year later or sometime in their career would test positive for a significant steroid and you just think, like, that's just, why not just come and punch me in the face? You know what I mean? Like, Why make me go through everything psychologically, beat me and take my result and act like it's nothing, and act like you're still a good human being? Well, I cheating in any sport in any way, be it doping or otherwise, is just so bad. And so unreasonable as a human, like it's just, I don't know. The whole Lance Armstrong thing just like blows my mind. Yeah. The conspiracy to cheat and the background story of all of that. And there have definitely been moments where it's been frustrating, but this was the way that I justified it as an athlete. So drugs don't give you any advantage unless you're willing to work to underpin the advantage of what they can do physically to you. So let me explain. So you've got point A and point B. if you take drugs, it allows you to do a certain amount of training sessions in concession to get from point A to point B in a fast-tracked way. But my logic was, okay, so if that person can do 7 training sessions in a 7-day week, back to back to back to back to back, I can do 10 training sessions with a couple of days rest in a fortnight period, but still be able to do the same amount of work that they did, but just with a little bit more recovery. It was probably bad logic, but that's what I needed to justify it to myself. So point A to point B for me was an arcing shape and a long way round, whereas point A to point B for those cheats out there was a straight line expressway. So that was my justification for it, rightly or wrongly, and, I don't know. But one thing I do know, and as I said at the start of this chat, I worked harder than anyone else. Yep. A lot of people say to me, oh, you didn't quite get there, or you didn't break 10 or whatever. I milked everything I could physically out of my body to be the best I could be, without a doubt. And I don't need to justify that to anybody. I don't need to look back on regrets or decisions poorly made. I know for a fact that when I started at 0, I was an 11:24 runner of 100 metres. And when I finished at the end, I ran 10:03. And that was enough for me at the end, to justify the work that I'd done, because I know I'd pushed every button there was to push.
Did you ever get approached to take performance-enhancing drugs? Did anyone ever come to you and say, why not try this?
I don't know definitively. No one, came along with a bag full of needles and said, this is going to make you run faster. But there were, looking back on it, there were definitely moments where I questioned what the outcome would have been through certain interactions that I'd had. So, for example, I went to a meeting in Europe, and my knee blew up in the warm-up the night before the race, and I didn't know why. It just randomly erupted, and the swelling was really bad. I could barely flex my knee, and I went to a physio that I'd known sort of on the tour, and an agent, a manager of one of the athletes. And I said to him, look, can you fix it? I don't know what's wrong. I can't get the swelling down. I've been icing it, whatever. And he said, look, I don't think so. I think you're going to have to, the physio said, I think you're just going to have to pull out tomorrow and see what happens after that, and we'll get the swelling down or whatever. And I remember the agent saying to me, do you want to run? Because we can make you run. We can get you there to the start line. And I was like, no, I'm all right. I'll have the day off. So those sort of moments, you think, what if I'd gone down the rabbit hole there, and what would have been? There have been other moments where I've been given certain things that have been unmarked, and I've just tossed them in the bin, knowing that why risk it? I mean, we're so spoiled. And so there was an Australian distance runner, Craig Mottram, Buster Mottram, who won a medal at the World Championships 2005 in the 5K, and just a great athlete to have around the team, and a very good athlete generally. But I remember having a chat with him and saying, how frustrating is it when you come up against the Kenyans and the Ethiopian athletes, because they're so dominant, they do so well, and there's this background of history for the Kenyan athletes particularly. And he says, the hardest thing is not the physical, but the mental, knowing that for a lot of those athletes, winning and losing is, could be the difference between setting their families up, being able to send some money home, pulling their families out of poverty. Those sort of motivators are hard for people in a Western society like Sydney or Melbourne, where Buster's from, where if you fail, you go to university or you go to TAFE or you pick up a job somewhere and you build your way through, and opportunity is rife. If you're motivated enough to do something, you can go and do it. So I remember him saying to me, you've got to find motivation equal or better to that. And it's very hard when you don't have a lifestyle that, pertains to being in poverty or likewise life or death situations. So, that was a really interesting learning along the way. But that also serves you well later in life as well, because you start to realise you don't take it for granted.
Yeah.
This idea that with sport comes opportunity, and that's why drugs was never on my agenda, because I knew that you've got a whole lifetime after. And by the time I retired, I had 2 kids, and I'm thinking, why would I choose that path?
Yeah.
Why would I jeopardize all of my future for that moment, with no guarantees either? You still got to do the work. Why not just do the work?
I know. I mean, you look at someone like Dean Capobianco, and I remember chatting to you about him recently, and it's the first thing you think about, that he got caught with something like that. It sticks with you forever, and thankfully you never went down that route, and it's not something we have to talk about with you. Instead, we celebrate your wonderful career, Shirvo, for what it was. You were just a fascinating Australian sports person for a long period of time, and you brought us a lot of joy, and it's great hearing you talk about it, but also about athletics in general. And I think everyone can gather your passion for it and what your time at the top meant to you and what it means to us, therefore. So I thank you so much for joining me today. It's been fantastic, enlightening, and just really interesting. Thank you so much.
No worries. Good to talk.
Great to talk, Shirvo, and we'll see you on our screens, no doubt, for a long while to come still. Matt Shirvington, thank you so much. It's been another episode of Greats with Garby. There's more to come. I trust, though, that you enjoyed this one thoroughly.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.